Is that better?
There we go. Perfect.
Thank
There we go.
you. You were trying to go blind. So anyways, I've got my pseudocode here from that salesperson's commission replit. Can you guys find yours? It's been a while. If you can't find it, just create a new one and we'll put the Python code in it. Since I've got mine here, I'm going to go ahead and edit my main.py file, my Python code, and get started with creating this code. So for this program, the first thing I want are some comments. And I remember that I could do the 3 single quotes to do block comments in Python. So remember, when we're coding in Python, we're creating scripts that are executed by the Python interpreter. And this script is going to be the sales commission. Over, but it did a little bit wacky. That's okay. And 8 for and calculate salesperson commission. So that should get our documentation set for this program that we're going to do our salesperson commission. And when I'm working with Python, remember a line comment is a # or hashtag symbol. So I'm going to use a hashtag symbol, and I want to comment. This is just going to be just declare our variables. And when I'm working with Python, there's kind of some interesting rules for variables that are available to all modules, and they use the keyword global. So in our pseudocode, we declared sales amount as a float and commission percent is an integer, and our commission amount is a float. With Python, we can do things a little bit differently because if you remember, Python will determine the data type for us. So I'm going to create a sales amount variable, and in my pseudocode, my variable name started with an uppercase S, but Python naming conventions prefer lowercase names for variables. So I'm going to use a lowercase name, and I'm going to start out setting my sales amount equal to 0.0. And by doing that, we're telling Python that this is a float variable. We could also cast this, putting this keyword float in front of that value so that we're double sure. Next is our commission percent. Was an integer, and percent should default to 0 until we know what it is. And finally, our commission amount is a float. Now, I'm not 100% sure about my syntax, so I'm going to run this and make sure that I don't have any errors so far. It's just a few lines of code, but I'll just let the good old Python interpreter do a syntax check for me. And sure enough, it doesn't like that equals. Whenever I'm creating a global variable in Python, I can't give it an initial value. So I'm going to delete all of these, all that work, and I can't even do it that way. So let's run again, make sure there are no syntax errors. Good. So no messages means no errors. That's good. No news is good news. So I am in better shape now. Now in our pseudocode, the first module that we have is our main module, and it calls all of our other modules. Well, in Python, we have to have our modules declared or coded before we can call them. So we're going to have to turn things around a little bit and define our modules first before our main. So in Python, when we want to define a module, we use that DEF statement. So I'm going to define our input module. Whenever I define a module or a function in Python, I use the DEF statement followed by the name of the module, followed by an open and close parenthesis to indicate there are no parameters passed to this module, and then a colon. And the colon indicates to the system that this statement has a body, so the body is indented. In our input module, we wanted to get the values for the sales amount and the commission percent. These are global variables, and I want to change their value in this module, so I'm going to include the global statement for those two variables. Those are the two variables I'm going to ask for input on.
I'm so sorry. So what are the rules around the global?
The rules are really unusual with Python. So first of all, our global variables have to be declared at the top, outside of any module. And then in any module where we want to update the value of those variables, we have to include the global statement also. So let's put that comment out to the side. This variable will be updated this module. So both of these variables are going to be updated because there are variables that we're asking to be input.
And it's from that module forward, or is it just for that module?
Just in this module. Just in the module where we'll update their value. So it's kind of weird. It's definitely an unusual Python thing. Has to do with global variables. See if we can get it to work. Now, since I've specified both of these variables will be updated, I can code my input statements. My sales amount, I want to process input from the prompt, enter the monthly sales amount. Now, you should have seen something like this in Code Academy with your input statements. But any questions or anything, just feel free to yell them out.
In Code Academy, it uses the raw input feature.
Oh, okay, good question. Thank you. That is because Code Academy is using that Python version 2.
2.7, yeah.
Yeah, and so with version 3, they eliminated the raw input and they made the default input type be a string. Since we want to input the sales amount as a float, we need to cast it as a float. So perfect question. Because we want this to be a number, we have to tell Python, input this value, which it's going to read in as a string, like a raw, and then we want to convert that or cast it as a float. So we're going to wrap that input statement in this float command. So we did a lot there. We're writing out the prompt, enter the monthly sales amount. We're reading the user's input, converting it to a float, and saving it in our sales amount variable. So all of that is happening from that one line of code. Now, same thing with our commission percent. We want to convert to an integer. So instead of a float, we'll cast it as an integer. In our input statement, prompt A, what is the commission percent? Okay, any other questions about that with Code Academy? I'm so glad you brought that up. So notice again, we're seeing just a little bit of difference there. Now, that's the end of my input module. So when I press enter, I'm still indented. I'm going to leave a blank line at the end there, but then I want to backspace to go back to column 1. If I want to test this, I need to run my input module. So far, that's the only thing I have coded. So in column 1, I could just type the name of my input module, with the open and close parenthesis, but no colon, because I'm not defining the module here. I'm calling it. So we should be able to test this. If we run it, what should happen is the Python interpreter is going to read through all our code. Notice that we have this module defined. Then when it runs into this line of code, it says execute that module. It will actually execute our module, and we should see these prompts come up for our input amounts. So let's run it and see. There's my first prompt. Enter the monthly sales amount. Let's say 5,000. And then enter the commission percent. Now at this point, if I typed something that was not numeric, my program would cancel because I'm casting this as an integer. So since I'm casting that, I don't have any sort of code in to handle errors, so it would cancel the program if we type something that wasn't numeric. I'll type in a numeric value, and it looks like everything ran as expected. My input function ran. I didn't get any errors. Now I'll run it again and show you what will happen if I type in something that's not numeric. I'll crash. And now when I look at this message, I see that I'm in my main Python module. At line 22, I called the input module. At line 19, my program did this input and converted to a float, and that's where it crashed. It couldn't convert the string to a float. So really look at your error messages so that you could determine where the error occurred and what the problem was. That was because I typed in non-numeric information, so it's my fault, so I won't do that. Okay, everybody's work okay? Got your input working? Now we've got our input here, so I'm going to create a new module, and I'm going to put it right under my input module. I'm going to define my calculate module, and we named it calc module. And I've got my open close parenthesis and my colon. Now again, I'm indented. And in my calculations module, I'm going to update a variable. I'm going to update the commission amount because I'm going to calculate that. So I'll put that global statement in. This variable will be updated. Now, because my other variables are global, I should be able to use them in the calculation. My commission amount is equal to our sales amount times our commission percent divided by 100. That looks good. Now, we didn't have a lot of calculations in this program. That's our only one. But we can go ahead and add it, a call to that module in column 1 to test it. Now I'm going to run my input module and then my calc module. I won't see anything happen in my calc module. I don't have any output or input statements in there, but I can be sure that it didn't crash if it runs, that my global statement was okay, and that it was able to find my information. So let's try it. Looks good. So we need to output, and then we'll be able to tell if everything's working. I'm going to put a comment here on where we're calling our calculations module. And then I want to add our output module right under our calc module. Notice our Python code is like actually more compact than the pseudocode. So a lot of people like to use Python kind of as a pseudocode sort of language. So in our output module, we want to print a message out. And we want it to say the sales amount of, and I'm going to put the $sign plus our sales amount. So that would be our first line of output. I'm doing something wrong with my print statement. What is it? It's not highlighting it. Trying to go into my replicas. I guess we're okay. It's not color coding the print statement. It's like, what am I doing wrong? It looks okay. It's just not color coding it.
It
So-
didn't color code any of mine either for the ones I've submitted so far.
It's like sometimes it does. So Replit has just been changing so much the past week or so. They go crazy. I wish they would wait for like a break. These companies that start working with education and then they don't think about the schedule. All right, so we've got our sales amount, and then the next thing we want is the commission is, and then after that, we're going to output the commission percent, and then we're going to add a percent sign. Now, as you're going through the Replits, they should be showing you some fancy print formatting that you can do. Lots of ways to do that in Python. I'm doing it kind of the simple way where we are just concatenating variables with strings. Now my final variable that I want to output is my commission amount. So everything should be all hunky-dory and good there. That looks good to me. So now I need to add a call for my output module. and then I can try testing. So now my program is complete. If it works properly, I'm in good shape. Let's run it and see. Okay, my monthly sales amount, I'll say 1,000. And their commission percent is 20. So then I got an error. Did you guys look at this error too? It says that my problem is on, is it line 33? No, line 33 calls the output module. And then it finds this error on line 27. It says, I can only concatenate strings, not floats, in our print message. Well, there's a couple of ways we can fix this problem. The best way is to wrap our float variable in an str command to cast it back as a string. So I can do that with my sales amount. I'll say, make it a string and enclose the variable name within parentheses. Now, another way I could do it is by using commas in my output. So let's try that with this bottom one. Instead of a plus sign, I'm going to put a comma there to concatenate. Now on my middle one, I'll convert that commission percent to a string by casting it as a string. It's right in the middle there. And we can see the difference between these two different ways of handling this. So the problem is this string within the double quotes is a string. Python knows how to print that. But this float, Python would go to a special place in its world to print it, but it can't because we've got it with this string. And it's like, which rules do you want me to follow? Do you want me to follow my printing string rules, or do you want me to follow my printing float rules? Because that's too much for it, we just make everything a string. And then we don't have that problem here, this type error. Okay, so let's see how it worked differently when we use the comma versus the plus sign. I'll do 1,000, 20. And so when we cast as a string, our variable's value shows up exactly in our print statement where we have it, if that makes sense. When we use the comma, Python inserts a space. So notice how we ended up with that space between the $sign and the 200. So that's fine, just so you know that that'll happen if you use the comma. The comma for concatenation is only available in Python. The plus sign is used by most programming languages. So that's a little bit of something that's just Pythonic. So that's all right. Either way works. So now here at the end, all of my calls to my modules have ended up being my main module. So I'm going to define that as my main. I'm going to select all three of these lines of code and press Tab to indent them. And then down at the very bottom, I'm going to say, run my main. Now I added that extra layer of module-ness, right? Because I wanted it to match our hierarchy chart. And we like having a main function, a place where our program starts. So if you notice, it's not much different. It's just an extra layer. Let's run it after that change, make sure it didn't break anything. Okay, so some things that you might want to try testing with this. You might want to try getting rid of those global keywords, seeing what happens. Does your data follow through from one module to the other, or does it not retain its globalness. Now, I'd like to show you a website before we go from this program. So let's copy all of our code. I'm going to start up here. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions that are unrelated to each other. So in terms of presentation, how would we force it to display 2 decimal points?
You would have to use the output formatting where you have a different output style. And so in your Code Academy, they'll show you, they have like percent signs and D's in it, but we're not ready to go there yet.
Okay.
So for this, be happy with having it formatted like this, and we'll get into that more in-depth formatting as time goes on, if that's all right.
That's fine. And then the print statement in the output module does not change the actual variable. So like the commission percentage and the commission amount are still floating in integers.
Yes.
So, and it would refer to the previously updated one, not the output from the output module.
The output from the output module will be that same variable. Yes.
Okay.
You're on it. Let's copy all this code and I'll show you this site because I think that it's really, really helpful. I got all my code copied, and this site is called Python Tutor. I'm going to search for that. And on my search results, even though I've told this Edge thing to not be aware of my location, look at it, liar, it is. I don't want those Springfield ones. I want Python Tutor, Visualize Python, Java. This is the site I want, pythontutor.com. When you go to that site, it will show you this visualize code execution header. Just click on this link, start visualizing your code now. Up at the top, mine is set to the right setting, Python 3.6. If it wasn't, I could do this drop down and choose a different language, but that's the language I want. So I'm just going to paste my code in that window. I've got all my code. It looks good down here to my execution of my main. So since I've got all my code pasted, I'm going to click this button, Visualize Execution. Now, when I do that, this goes to this visualizer tool. And we have some options here. Over on the left, we have our code window. So we should see our code. We see this little red arrow that's pointing at the next line of code to execute. Notice it's already skipped past our comment block. It knows that's not anything it needs to execute. Down at the bottom, we have some options. Some are grayed out. Right now, we can only next and last. So I'm going to click next and let this thing start executing my code. It's reading my input module. And notice over here in the display window, it's showing, oh, I found this input module. Here's where that function is. If anybody calls it, I know how to get to it now. Now I'm sitting at my calc module. When I click next, you'll see this code visualizer will have information about our calc module. And now our output module. And finally, our main. And now the visualizer and Python know that we have these 4 modules in our code. We're sitting at column 1 on line 36, ready to execute that line of code. So when I click next, it starts running our main module. Here you can see in the code visualizer, it's running our main. If I click next, it'll go to the call for our input module. If I click next, it will start running our input module. Now, the first thing in our input module are our two global statements. So let's see what happens when it processes those. It didn't do much, did it? But now down here at the bottom, I have my input prompt. Enter the monthly sales amount. I'll put in that $1,000 and click submit. Now I see my variable. There's my sales amount variable that has a value of 1,000. My input prompt for the commission percent now is over here. It's ready to run. So I'm going to type a number in there. We'll do 20 and submit. And now we should see both variables are here with their values. I'm going to keep going next. Our input module is done now. So control will return back to our main. And we'll start executing our calc module. Our calc module will calculate our commission amount. So we should see that variable show up with its value. And then our calc module is done. So we return control to our main. It calls our output module. And in our output module, we're going to print out our strings and those values from our variables. And then we should be done. So the visualizer is really cool because it not only does it show you with the little arrow exactly how your code is executing, but it shows you what the value of all your variables is, what your input is, and what your output is, so that you can kind of check everything. Did everybody get that? Did you find it? Get it to run okay? All those cool things. It's pretty cool. Everybody really likes it, and I wish that we could use it for a lot of other languages. Now, if you have a problem with your program while you're here using the visualizer, you can click Edit this code. That'll take you back to that main screen where you originally pasted your code, and you could change it if you wanted to, and then run it again. So we're good. If we did make changes to it, we need to make sure to copy those back into our original code, our replit, or whatever it is that we were working on. So Python Tutor will help you a lot in seeing how your code is executing, seeing if you have any problems with it.